And welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this exciting conversation with Matt Rogers, co-founder of Nest and Mill. I'm Jenny Park, Executive Director of Climate One. I'm taking over the reins from our founder, Greg Dalton. He leaves behind some very big shoes to fill, but as you can see, I'm trying. And Greg's not going very far, as you'll see. He'll be back on stage in a minute, but as I say, always a founder. Once a founder, always a founder. We're in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I'd like to acknowledge the Ohlone and other indigenous people who have stewarded these unceded lands for 10,000 years. There are many different tribes and people who are working hard to restore their culture, heal from historic trauma, and protect their traditional territory. Indigenous people are still very much here today, and we are committed to keep honoring their existence and tread on their land with deep respect and a light foot. We're recording today for our radio show that's heard on over 90 public radio stations around the country, including on KQED on Monday nights at 10 p.m., as well as for our podcast, which drops every Friday. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, including now on YouTube. And we record here in person many times throughout the year. If you haven't already, you can sign up for our newsletter at climateone.org, and you'll be among the first to know about events like this one. And speaking of events coming up in April, we have an exciting stack of programs that we'll be organizing as part of SF Climate Week. On April 20th, we'll have the one and only Annie Leonard. She's the former head of Greenpeace USA and leader of the Jane Fonda PAC. She has a new book about protest, and she'll be joined by Danielle Lee, founder of the Climate Action Club, and South San Francisco City Council member James Coleman. And they'll be talking about all the different ways that you can promote positive change on climate action. That will be followed by an experiential workshop on climate wayfinding with Catherine Wilkinson, co-founder of the All We Can Save project. And then on April 21st, Tuesday, we'll have two of the winners of the prestigious Goldman Environmental Prize. They'll be here in person. And I'm not allowed to reveal who they are yet, but every Goldman Prize winner we've featured in the past brings a deeply personal, heroic story of protecting their community against powerful interests. And then on Wednesday, on April 22nd, we'll have three leading candidates running to fill Nancy Pelosi's seat in Congress. That'll be Scott Wiener, Connie Chan, and Shoika Chakrabarty. All of these events are going to be hot tickets, so make sure you get them while they last by going to our website, climateone.org/attend. Toward the end of tonight's program, we'll have time for a few questions from the audience, so please write your name and a concise question on the cards on your seats. Once someone from our team is going to collect your questions, and Greg will then call out people by name and welcome you to the microphone in the order that he is called. And with that, it's my great pleasure to invite Greg Dalton and Matt Rogers to the Climate One stage.
Welcome, Matt. Great to see you here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. It's really exciting. So I think you grew up in Florida, and I'm guessing you were around 10 years old or so when Hurricane Andrew hit. What are your memories of that experience?
I actually remember it like it was yesterday. It was a pretty pivotal point in my life and actually my climate journey, actually. So I grew up in Gainesville, Florida, which is kind of right in the middle of the state. And we didn't really have very many hurricanes in the middle of the state. Yeah, on the coast they had quite a few.
Sure.
But Hurricane Andrew was pretty ferocious. And we had these glass skylights over our living room. And I remember the glass literally like leaving the house and like the rain pouring in the home and my parents having to explain kind of what was going on and why. And that was like a storm of the century.
Pretty scary for a 10-year-old.
It was really scary for a 10-year-old. But then we had several more like that. When you have a storm of the century every couple of years or every year, that's when you start to take note. And especially growing up in Florida, we had it in our face all the time.
And so how did that affect you? That's sort of your climate awakening, or kind of, you didn't probably think of it as climate. Maybe your parents didn't say this is climate change. The roof flew off.
Yes. At the time, this is like, let's call it early 90s and late 90s. We didn't call it climate then. We talked about environmentalism. And And it was really kind of the core of who I was. When I was in high school, I wasn't old enough to vote yet, but when Al Gore was running for president, my now wife and I, we weren't married then, actually campaigned for him in Florida. Yeah, we were out there knocking on doors and holding up signs and doing our best, and I should have stayed out there a little bit longer.
And yeah. Despite all the things you've done since, you're probably best known for co-founding Nest, the thermostat company. So I want to spend a little bit talking about that. When you co-founded Nest, were you kind of, I hear you were a political activist. You were also maybe a bit of an engineering nerd into heating and ventilation. So, what was your inspiration for doing that?
I've always been a builder. Even as a child, I loved to build things. And when I was at Apple in the 2000s building iPods and iPhones, it became very clear that technology was changing, and the power that we had in our hands, what eventually became the iPhone was remarkable. And the things in our home didn't look at all like that. I was living in a townhouse in Los Gatos, and I had the most beige things on the wall that you can imagine, from Honeywell, probably from the 1980s.
You got to squint at them to see the numbers.
It literally made no sense. Like the guys who were making the iPhone living with these beige plastic boxes on their wall. And it was very, very clear that we could build something a lot better. So my then boss at the time, Tony Fidel, and I, we left, and we started on what we thought was the most important thing in the home, which was heating and cooling. And a lot of folks kind of laughed at us at the time. They're like, hey, like the inventors of the iPhone are working on air conditioning?
Furnaces are not sexy.
They're not, but actually they're really important. At the time, I think the stats are still true. Heating and cooling is about half of the energy we use at home. It's a massive part of our global footprint. And it's a huge cost for folks. So it made a lot of sense to put the A team on it. And actually, the lessons learned from that journey and that ethos of working on these overlooked problems, but that are really important, eventually became what I do at Incite and the company I started, Mill, working on waste.
And you sold that to Google for $3.2 billion. You're close to 30 years old. What was that like? Letting go of your baby and hitting that kind of at such an early age.
I tend to not celebrate wins when they happen. I kind of just move on to work on the next thing. And I stayed at Google for a while. I stayed at Google for another 5 years to help build and shepherd that business and hand it off to Google. But at the same time, also, especially reflecting on my upbringing, my wife and I spent a lot of time on how we could give back. And after we sold the company to Google, we almost immediately started a family foundation. We started doing impact investing and really leaned into climate in a very big way.
Yeah, and we'll get to some of that impacting that different part, political, philanthropy, et cetera. So you came to Mill. So you're fabulously wealthy. You're 30 years old. You created this cool thing. You took something that's kind of ancient and made it cool and hip, and then you decide to go to food waste and chicken feed. Explain that one for me.
It's kind of the same thought process. We look at our waste every day and we think we can't do much about it. It's one of these things that it's a daily problem. And we all kind of take it for granted. And the way my brain is wired is to look at those kinds of things and think differently. So when we in the middle of the pandemic in 2020, when we were kind of living all in our own waste and my house was full of fruit flies, it was very obvious that, there could be a better way. And spent a lot of time on Zooms and phone calls with my now co-founder, Harry, talking about, could we do something quite different? And through many twists and turns, that's what eventually led to the starting of Mill.
Right, and Mill is a company that sort of and there's food waste at all stages, from the farm, at the store, in the refrigerator. I'm sure there's some moldy hummus in my refrigerator right now, and so how did you think about approaching that very complicated long chain, which is part of, we make enough food. It's a tragedy. We make enough food to feed the world, but it doesn't get to the right places. And so much of it's wasted.
Yeah, we waste about 40% of the food we grow. which is astonishing if you think about it.
It's a crime.
It's embarrassing, and all of our parents and grandparents told us growing up not to waste food.
Yeah.
But yet we do. I think I'll get this close to right. We waste about $400 billion a year in the U.S. on food waste. Like that's like the amount of food we throw out.
Yeah.
It's like more than the GDP of most countries.
Right. And so, you chose to attach, not surprisingly, the consumer-facing part of that, right, rather than the food part of that. It's like, okay, how can we make waste cool or make it different? A lot of people have those little green composting things, which are all right.
Yeah, they're kind of awful, and that's what we started Mill. And going back to how I thought about building Nest, you start with the most important and the hardest thing first, because if you could do the hardest thing first, you could do anything after that. So we started with building a product for people at home to make it easy to recycle food. And I had one of those compost pails on my counter, and my house was full of fruit flies. So we set out to design a product that was beautiful, easy to use, never smelled, and incredibly easy and fun to use. Something that people would actually use every day.
Right. Okay. And but a lot of places don't even have those things, right? But okay, let's start with the people who do have that. And you're calling this food recycling or composting. Is there a difference?
I actually I'm using different words on purpose. So composting is a natural process that takes organic matter and kind of returns it to the soil as a kind of soil additive, as a fertilizer. Food recycling is something that effectively we are inventing. In that we're creating multiple pathways for food to be recycled. Either food could go to compost and feed the soil, or food could go to animal feed and feed animals. Food could actually also be used to make energy. There's lots of things we could do with food. So we're actually trying to make a bigger category than just composting.
Okay, so if people, I think I've read something like 3 or 4% of food is composted in this country. It's very small, but a growing number of jurisdictions, cities, counties have some curbside collection. There's laws in California, perhaps Vermont, maybe even other states. So for those who have curbside collection, it gets collected by a truck. It goes often trucked far away. You can put, industrial composting, right? Okay, so that creates sort of black gold, and it comes back to those cities. So are you trying to displace that? Are you saying you're better than that, or you're just an alternative for people who don't have that option?
We looked at where else in the world things are working better, and we looked at South Korea. And South Korea, I think, is the best in the world at handling waste. I think maybe it's a matter of national security. They're a peninsula, and they import calories. So in South Korea, 95% of their food gets recycled, either into animal feed to feed chickens and pigs, or to feed the soil. And we looked at kind of the elements of that system, and we said, what are the things that we could build here in a US context that better fit our lives? And part of that was a product for our homes, but also part of it is a system, a ability to collect this material, get it to its highest and best use in your local community.
Okay, so if I buy, it's what, $300 or something to get this device to put on my counter. You say it's nicer and better than the green pail that some people have. Put food scraps in there. Then what happened? It dehydrates it, right? It's not actually composting it, so it takes the water out. And then what?
Yeah, so part of our special sauce, as product designers, is can we make a product that is easy and fun that you'll actually want to use? And the technology that we ended up going with is dehydration. And the reason why is what makes food waste gross is when it gets wet and gloopy, when it starts to rot and grow mold and attracts fruit flies. When you take the water out of food, all that gross stuff stops. But also what's nice is it gets light and airy. It's light, it's easy to transport. It doesn't go bad, it's shelf stable. So what we actually found almost by accident in solving the grossness problem is a new way to make logistics possible. Part of what makes food waste difficult to manage as a society, and why we don't often have green bins at our curb to collect food waste, is because it's very expensive, because it's wet and it goes bad really fast.
Yeah, and so I put this in here, it's dehydrated, and then are you going to collect it from me, or I'm going to put it in my garden? Because part of the dehydration is you've also removed some of the nutrient and the biological value of that by taking the water out.
So what's great about dehydration is actually it keeps all the nutrients in there. Like all the calories, the micronutrients and the macronutrients are all still there. What stops is the clock on it going bad, it rotting. So what's nice now is you have lots of different options and things to do with this. A lot of our customers, most of our customers, actually use it in their own gardens at home. They use it as a soil additive, as a fertilizer. For those who don't have a garden, you could put it in your municipal green bin, like we have in the Bay Area, something that's happening more and more in the country. For those who don't have any options, Mill actually built a collection system so that people could get this food waste back to a great place for it to be recycled.
And you also have a partnership with Whole Foods to turn their fruit, vegetables, scraps into chicken feed. So tell us about.
Tell us about that. This is really exciting. So we started with the hardest thing, which is, can we solve it at home? But we always envisioned doing this at mega scale. And grocery stores waste a ton of food. Actually, literally, like about a ton per store per day, which is astonishing to think about. So yeah, we're working with Whole Foods as our first customer, but actually many more customers coming on a much larger scale mill and the entire full recycling loop to get it back into chicken feed or to feed the soil.
That makes sense for them. They take waste and make an input. I also want to get just for a moment back to the curbside, the thing. You have a life cycle analysis on your website, which is the idea of sort of looking at the inputs, how customers use it. Is this better than the alternative? And I couldn't really understand it, so I asked a professor at UC Berkeley who basically said, if you have your own yard for composting or curbside collection, keep doing that because that exists. But if you don't have that option, Mill can offer incremental reduction in climate harming emissions. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. So most folks don't realize that when food waste goes in the trash, it's not a neutral thing. It's an actively bad thing.
Really bad.
When food waste goes to landfill, it degrades anaerobically and creates methane. And for those who don't know, methane is like 80 times worse than CO2 from a warming perspective.
Super pollutant.
Super pollutant, super bad. So, keeping food waste at a landfill is paramount. So that's why we kind of go to extra efforts to create all these different pathways and ways of using food waste instead of just throwing it in the trash.
Indeed. Now, is there an AI component? Is there an AI component to this to sort of look at, maybe this is more on the B2B side, the wholesale side, to identify the trash? I recently went to Recology, where recycling is collected here in San Francisco, and they have humans taking out the bad things from the stream. Then they have these AI things picking out the things of high value, metals. So there's human and AIs doing the recycling part. You're kind of the parallel part with food recycling or composting. How does AI fit in?
AI has been a remarkable tool for our industry. So we're building a camera into our commercial scale mill bin. And what it's able to do is provide a real-time stream of what's being thrown away. So if you think about for a grocery store, they can start getting real-time information on what's being thrown away, but then act on that information. And AI could automatically say, oh, we ordered too many bananas this Thursday. Next Thursday, now we know let's order fewer bananas. Or for our hot bar, we're throwing away a lot of biscuits. We need to bake fewer biscuits because we're wasting that many and people aren't buying them. So AI is allowing us to effectively prevent waste from happening, which is ultimately the best thing we could do. Getting at that $400 billion that we just talked about wasted food. Ultimately, we want to prevent wasted food altogether.
Now realize that AI is not one thing. It's kind of this umbrella term, and there's predictive AI, which could make weather forecasts or complete the sentence of the email I'm writing, or cancer screenings. And there's generative AI, which uses a lot of money, a lot of energy to produce fake videos and other things. So you're leaning into AI as a force for good. So how worried are you about AI's negative impacts, knowing what you know about technology and energy and climate?
I mean, I've been working with AI for a long time. I've been working on it before it was called AI. Back in the Nest days, we called it machine learning. And we launched the Nest Learning Thermostat. And then we built this Nest Cam fleet of products where it would tell you when the UPS driver dropped off a package at your door. This is just, technology. Technology is a tool. And really, the value of the technology is in the hands of the people who are building it. And it's incumbent on us as entrepreneurs, as technology leaders, to use technology for good.
Right, because there's kind of a trope in Silicon Valley, like, oh, technology's neutral. It's like it's not this or that, but we know that, is that true, or is it more?
I mean, I think technology is neutral. Technology is a tool, but people are not neutral.
Yeah,
So
algorithms are not. Yes,
that's right. And the folks who are driving the technology and the leaders of the companies that are building the technology, they have a responsibility on this.
So many climate solutions require behavior change, and this has been really hard to get a large number of people to do a little, eat a little less, drive a little less, do these nudges. So there's a whole, a lot of behavioral scientists have focused on that. So what have you learned, and what actually makes people, make change versus just kind of virtue signaling or expressing concern?
I've been working on behavior change my entire career, actually. Going back to my time at Apple, my work at Nest. For those who've had Nest thermostats at home, that green leaf that you saw on the dial was a little nudge to kind of send you in the direction of saving energy.
And does that work? Is that only work to a certain? That's a carrot, or it's a I don't know, identity reinforcer, a little bit of virtue signal.
It does work. So again, I've been out of Nest for a while, almost a decade now, but Nest thermostats save about 20% off your heating and cooling bill. So they save quite a bit of energy. But really, when it comes to behavior change, the key is to make things better. And Nest thermostat is better than what came before. A mill bin is better than a countertop compost pail. An electric car is better than a gas car.
For sure.
A Beyond Meat burger is worse than a hamburger. And that is why people do not eat them.
Right. So it's got to be, there's this place, it has to be better. People will go for better. They won't necessarily go for more virtuous.
That's right. Yeah, virtue signaling gets you a little bit, but really that does not get you widespread behavior change. And I think about when you mentioned, don't eat meat. One day we might have plant-based meats or cultured meats that taste as good and are as nutritious, but that is not where we are today.
And by cultured meat, you mean like lab-grown actual cells. It's like a beef without a cow, but it's grown in a lab.
That's right. Beef without a cow is a great way of putting it.
Right, and there's tuna without a fish, and all sorts of things. That was kind of in vogue for a while recently, not so much lately. Is that something you see as promising? Because
I as a with my other hats on, as a technology investor and philanthropist, these are still categories that we invest in that still exist. They're still very early stage and are still very expensive. But the idea is that one day, as the technology improves, as things scale, one day that a lab-grown hamburger will be, as cost-effective as a cow who's raised in the field.
Right.
But we're not there yet.
Right. And put a lot of ranchers out of work and have a lot less emissions. And they could, there's a dominant narrative that Silicon Valley is no longer investing in green tech or clean tech. For lots of different reasons. There's been a couple of, waves of a lot of money from Silicon Valley going into clean energy, then it pulls back and it comes back in again. What are you seeing right now?
We are changing the words, but we're still doing the work. And I think about the last time this happened. So the clean tech 1.0 boom and bust. We started Nest just in that kind of time of bust. And we never called Nest a clean tech company. We were building a thermostat, and the primary purpose was to help people save energy, but we never called it a clean tech company. And I think about, Mill.
Why not? Because you thought that you wanted to, why not?
Why not? Because it's really about identifying what the product people are buying is and what the category is, and how you think about shopping. Things like clean tech or IoT, these are like investor words.
Internet of Things.
Yeah, these matter very little to normal people. Okay. The average person doesn't buy something because it's a clean tech product. They buy it because it's going to be helpful and valuable to their family.
Okay. And so you say Silicon Valley still investing in green. They're not talking about it. So is that example of, is there green hushing? People are doing it, but they're not talking about it.
Yeah, or we're calling it what it is. We're working on energy, or we're working on transportation, or we're working on food and agriculture. All these things contribute to the climate and the environment. But they're just a much more focused way of talking about it.
So if you were pitching Nest or Mill today, would you use different language? Would you do it differently?
And the way I talk about my company today is I'm building a waste technology company. And inherently, by reducing waste and preventing waste, we're doing a good thing for the planet.
And Americans like technology. They don't like waste. Okay. And you're solving a problem.
It's a very bipartisan thing to do. There's actually no pro-waste group out there.
It's actually true. There's, Dick Cheney famously said, if energy efficiency was some sort of virtue, but efficiency was something that could cut across political divides. Everyone's for efficiency because everyone had a mother who said, don't waste.
That's right. And actually, with Mill today, I spend a lot of time in D.C. working with folks on both sides of the aisle. It's a completely bipartisan thing. Everyone out there is saying we should prevent food waste and we should do the right thing with food.
That's quite something there's in this wacky world. There's no like pro-waste group out there. So, okay. So where do you see the biggest gaps between what climate needs for climate and the money that's flowing into, whether it's venture or late stage or private equity? That's all kind of, certain kind of money that's going into to fund things that basically people can't buy today. Where do you see what gaps do you see?
I think at the earliest stages of let's call it research stages and kind of early stage technology development, there's enough capital. Not everyone would probably agree with me in that, but I think there's a lot of action there and a lot of activity and a lot of flowers are blooming. When I'm seeing a gap is after that, after technology is designed and proven and needs dollars to scale. And then once it's scaled and it's economical, there's infinite dollars out there. Like you think about solar as an example for that. Like solar's in the category of something that's fully launched and it's economical and is better than the alternative.
And it doesn't need its subsidies anymore?
And it does not need subsidies today, right? Solar is faster and cheaper than alternatives.
Better in every way. And usually, we haven't fought a war over the sun yet, but yeah.
Yeah,
right.
That's right. That's right. But I think about this missing middle, and that's something that's my industry talks about a lot is the missing middle. And that's actually where philanthropy really needs to step up the most. And I think about with my family office, what we spend our time on is how can we activate capital in that missing middle?
But that's not a typical use of philanthropy, right? So, I mean, you can do that, because it's your money, but other philanthropists don't like to take that kind of risk. They don't think that's their role, right?
Well, in the spirit of thinking differently, maybe this is how my mind works, but actually philanthropy's job is to find market failures, to find gaps in the market where the market isn't working and shift things to the right direction and get the snowballs going in the right way. So actually, this is a great use of philanthropy. And if anything, actually, using philanthropy as an investing tool is also multiplicative for philanthropy. If my philanthropy ends up driving a return, that's even better. Then there's more money to be granted later.
But why isn't there money for something like, I hear this a lot, like, oh, this little thing is great. If we had 1 million of them, they could have this big impact. Okay, a lot of times that doesn't happen. So why isn't there money to take things that are proven and make more of them to make a market? That seems like, it seems like a market failure.
Yeah, it is a market failure. It kind of comes down to two things. One is imagination, and the other is economics. Markets don't always have imagination, and this is something that I think is unique about Silicon Valley and venture capital. Venture capital inherently is supposed to have imagination, but the other is economics. And capital begets more capital. If you could find something that is profitable and scalable, more dollars will come into that.
Sure. Okay. So you think you're okay with your philanthropy funding something to go from small to bigger, and then other people make a bunch of money off that. You're okay with that?
I'm great with that, actually. That means my dollars were really impactful and they were catalytic, and this important climate solution got to where it needed to go.
So as someone who creates innovative solutions, energy, waste, and other things, what do you think about the dramatic shift in the politics of Silicon Valley toward energy, climate, and democracy?
It depends on which hat I'm wearing. When I'm wearing my investor hat, investors are trying to do right by their limited partners. They're trying to do right by their companies and to build their companies, and they're trying to be pragmatic.
Hold on, that excuse has been, we're serving our shareholders. That allows Tim Cook to go to the White House and do the things we've seen him do and say, it's for the shareholders, right? I'm serving my shareholders. Is that an excuse?
It's not an excuse. I mean, as a CEO, I can empathize. It's a really hard place to be. You've got a really large business with, in his case, hundreds of thousands of employees, and I don't even know how many shareholders around the world. So he has a responsibility to them. But again, we all wear multiple hats, and with my personal hat,
not the only responsibility that he has, right?
This is true, and that's where I was going. With my personal hat on, it's important that we use our voice and use our dollars towards moving towards the right direction. And I would love to see more of my colleagues do that too.
And how much of a role did, because a lot of this is toward the orientation toward government. There's always been a libertarian streak in Silicon Valley. And yet Silicon Valley, I remember growing up, driving through, and it was, Silicon Valley was aerospace and it was defense. So what role did government play in creating Silicon Valley, and have people forgotten that?
Oh, we've all forgotten that. Silicon Valley wouldn't exist without the government. I think about the major innovations that have created, everything that we've built on, whether it's the internet, which was a DARPA project, or early work in silicon, or as you said, the aerospace and defense industries, or the EV industry was created with government subsidies, or even things like SpaceX. SpaceX exists because of the government dollars.
So does Tesla. Tesla got bailed out. Yeah.
Yeah, the DOE loan program was critical for a really important time for that company. What's enabled Silicon Valley to exist actually is a confluence of many things. I think government and R&D funding was critical to Silicon Valley. I think the academic institutions, Stanford, Berkeley, absolutely critical.
Sure.
And then capital was really important. And it's something that actually is fairly unique about Silicon Valley, is how much innovation, capital for innovation exists here.
Right. So this ecosystem, which lots of places have tried to replicate unsuccessfully, right? There's trying to be Silicon Beach. Everyone's tried to sort of we can have our own Silicon Valley. The Mediterranean climate, I think, is part of it. Productivity happens in a certain band of weather around the world. So this amazing place rose out of government help, and then has developed this ethos that it's very disparaging of government.
I think it's very easy, once you've made it, to forget all the things that contributed to getting you there. And I think a lot of my colleagues forget that sometimes it was a lot of folks coming before you that helped. Either it was government that helped, or all the folks along the way that got you where you were, and also a lot of luck. And I think Silicon Valley has developed a bit of hubris in that.
Yeah, and a lot of timing too, because Eric Schmidt, Bill Gates, some of these guys are born in certain years when you happen to be in a certain place when a certain wave of technology emerges. Post mainframe PC, et cetera. Now that's probably happening with AI. It certainly happened with PCs and the internet. Along with running Mill, you run an investment company. You talk about different hats here: philanthropy and an activism organization called Incite. So tell me how you juggle these different hats and how you think of those things fitting together, advocacy, philanthropy, and impact investing.
So it all comes down to, at the core, around talent, and trying to help talent working on really important problems for society with all the different tools we could provide. And a lot of my colleagues forget how many tools could exist. Either they're only investors, or they're only entrepreneurs, or they only run a foundation and do nonprofit work. My wife and I try to think quite creatively about finding talent in all aspects of society, whether they're building companies, working in government, doing research, and trying to give them the tools, whether they're financial tools, support, mentorship, connections, to help them accomplish their dreams.
And do you do that? There's often a lot of control in those things. Investing often is a lot about control. Philanthropy is often about control. And so, in finding talent, how much of that is letting go of control, even though you're providing some resources?
For me, it's actually the opposite of control. It's really about enabling. And when we find a great entrepreneur or social entrepreneur or activist out there, they're on a mission. And if we could provide rocket fuel to them, they could get to their dream faster. And we've now done this a couple times. I think about maybe one of my favorite examples of this. About 10 years ago, I read an article that a grad student at Berkeley wrote. This guy, Noah Deich, he wrote an article about removing CO2 from the air, and that this is something that's critical to the climate equation. The IPCC says, hey, at some point we need to start removing emissions if we're ever going to meet our targets.
Yep.
And I sent him an email saying, well, what do you need to do to do this? And he said, the entire federal government is only spending about $10 million a year on this. And if we're going to get to any scale, this is going to be hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars one day. So Noah and I got together, and I helped him start a nonprofit called the Center for Carbon Removal, which eventually became Carbon 180. I funded a scientific study at the National Academies to study carbon removal. I seed funded about a dozen companies that were going to build in the carbon removal space, and then eventually took that National Academy study to Congress and funded a bunch of congressional candidates to look at that, and which eventually became many pieces of the IRA.
Inflation Reduction Act, yeah.
Yes.
It's had some of that. And so carbon removal is the idea that we kind of suck it out of the air because we're not going to reduce emissions, change our ways. Behavior change isn't going to get us there. So we need this. I'm a bit of a skeptic about that. It's very expensive. And also there's concerns that it creates a moral hazard, which is, the fossil fuel companies would love to have this. Like, we can keep on polluting and we'll make money putting it up there, and someone else will make money taking it down.
I'm an all of the above approach kind of guy, and looking at the amount of shots on goal we need to take to hit our climate goals, we need everything.
Well, maybe a little bit of an insurance policy, like, yeah.
Or even if we do everything, we've still already polluted enough that we need to take CO2 out.
Right.
We're already 410 ppm plus, and for those keeping track, we're way off where we need to be. So we have to undo the pollution we've done in addition to cutting emissions dramatically. I think the reason why I use this as an example is it was less about us controlling and driving something, and then it was really about recognizing the talent in Noah and what he saw out there, and then giving him the rocket fuel and all the different tools in the tool chest to go accomplish his dream.
Right. And, I can see you're taking the portfolio. I'm also an all of the above guy. Like, I wouldn't put my money in direct, carbon removal, but if you want to, that's great. It's like we need more people doing all of these sorts of things. And getting that you think systemically about waste, you thought systemically about energy, you think systemically about, I guess, social and market change. There's all these different levers. We're not taught systemic thinking in our educational system. So how did you come to this systemic approach?
I got really lucky. So I started my career at Apple, and I started my career at Apple during a really golden time. I joined Apple in 2004, and this was kind of as Apple was coming into resurgence. Steve had just come back a few years earlier and really rebooted the company, and it was still small and nimble, and we really were taught to think as systems thinkers. And the team I joined was the iPod team. And the iPod wasn't just a great music player, but the iPod was also iTunes and the iTunes store and working with record labels and thinking about this end-to-end system. There were many of MP3 players that came before the iPod, but what Steve imbued in us at Apple was to think about the whole end-to-end experience.
Fortunate to have that experience and that thinking, yeah. And then podcasting, right? Climate One was founded right after that, and podcasting was not an industry yet. You also invest in Arena, which trains people to run for political office and disrupt the political landscape. So what are you trying to disrupt, and how?
More talent. And one of the things that my wife and I often talk about is, can we bring in more new talent?
You think the old farts ought to get out of the way?
I think that some of their time has come, but also part of what makes a great democracy is new voices, and we need more young people involved in politics. It's kind of an undeniable thing, and it's especially difficult if you have no background in it, no network in it. So the reason why my wife Swati created the Arena, why she was one of the co-founders there, is to provide a platform and tools for someone who has no experience in politics to get involved.
Right. Okay. And so the premise there is that younger people will bring fresh ideas, that they'll somehow be able to shake some of the incumbency and dissatisfaction so many people have with politics, because politicians are making promises they don't deliver on. People get disgusted with the system.
That's right. And I think we started the Arena back in 2016, and some of that early class. For example, Senator Andy Kim now was from the original Arena class, and now he's a senator in New Jersey, or Lauren Underwood in Illinois, or Lena Hidalgo in Texas. There is a group of of young folks who didn't have any political experience, and now many of them are in Congress, in the Senate, or mayors of cities, and some of them actually have run for president.
And so much of politics these days is performative, about showing up on social media, not necessarily governing and doing the hard work, right? So do you train them to be performers to get into office, or are you training them to actually, because running for office is like a lot of it's very different than the nitty gritty of doing legislating and running a city or a state.
Yeah, part of the way I think about it is about talent. And when you think about talent in a company, you think about being a great manager, being a leader, how to build teams, how to run a business. That same ethos could exist in other parts of society. And part of the approach we take at Incite is how can we approach talent and give them all the tools, and leadership development and trainings and how to communicate, but also how to govern, how to build a team, how do you hire a team? These are things that, especially if you're just entering politics, don't necessarily come naturally.
Right, and we often hear government's broken. They're bad managers. I run a business. I run a business. I can run government. Do you find that credible? And people who've run a business means they can run a government agency?
The skills are actually a bit different. And
their incentives and tools are very different. You don't have
exactly where I was going to go next. Yeah, the incentives are different, but also your constituents are different. When you're running a company, your shareholders, your customers, your employees, your key stakeholders. Government is not designed to be profitable. Government is there to serve the people. And
everybody, not just the most profitable customer.
That's right. And actually, sometimes government is supposed to work on the people who need it the most.
The Postal Service has to deliver to everybody. UPS and FedEx can decide, I'm not delivering over there, we're just going to deliver here.
That's right. So learning to lead an organization like that and how to build that kind of team is not necessarily the same as how to build a company.
Well, I hope that, that's very interesting. So how do you think about your own influence and power?
Oh, I tend to think about it a lot. I was raised with a pretty big sense of responsibility. I was the oldest of three boys. I had to take care of my brothers a lot. And part of my ethos...
What did your parents do?
My dad was a physician, and my mom was a designer. And I guess when you put those things together, you could get an engineer-designer combination. But I was always raised with a sense of responsibility. And when I had this big windfall selling Nest to Google, one of the first things my wife and I did was put together our foundation and start to think about our impact. And
good. A lot of people just I'll give it away when I'm dead.
I heard this from a lot of my colleagues too. Or philanthropy is something you do when you're old. And we were 30 at the time. And our minds are still sharp and our networks are still really active. Now's a great time to get started with philanthropy. We attended so many of these giving pledge gatherings and those kinds of things. And rather than just pledge, we said, hey, how would you do the work? And if anything, I hope a lot of my very wealthy billionaire colleagues get the message and do more too.
Yeah, because a lot of that giving pledge stuff is not really it's kicking the can down the road.
It's a pledge with not a lot of accountability, right? And I think about these things are reported fairly regularly. The asset base of billionaires has grown remarkably over the last decade, but their giving has not grown nearly as large as their assets.
No, the percentage. There's Mackenzie Scott and a few people are up in the 20, 30%. A lot of them are less than 5% of their assets. It's big dollar amounts, but tiny percentage of the assets.
That's right. And especially in times like these, when we have so much climate work we need to do, health work, social inequality, education. There are so many issues we have as a society. This is literally what philanthropy was designed to do. And I think about, I went to Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, an institution literally built on philanthropy. Andrew Carnegie, built not just the university, but so many museums, libraries, and schools around CMU. This is what we need to do. And, I find it astonishing that a lot of my colleagues don't do enough.
Does giving away money make you happy?
There's been a lot of studies on this. For me, it doesn't make me happy, but it's very enriching and rewarding to see what great things happen with the results. And I mentioned Noah Deitch as an example. we've worked with dozens of organizations over the years, and that impact does make me happy. It's incredibly rewarding. And seeing those folks go out into the world and then do great things.
There's also studies on how wealth and power decreases empathy. And I'm curious how you guard against that, or if you've experienced that yourself, in yourself or others.
I've certainly seen it in others. My wife and I do a lot of work to stay very close to the work ourselves. We don't have a big team. Our family office, our foundation, we have 2 employees. So we do a lot of the work ourselves. And when you stay that close to it and don't have, an army of gatekeepers, and you talk to the folks in the companies, you talk to the folks working in the nonprofits, when you speak to the activists and you're really close to the work, it's easier to keep your empathy.
So how do you encourage your values among younger entrepreneurs you support?
It's funny you should say that. So as an investor, especially early stage investor, it's part of what we're enabling. And I don't know if a lot of investors think of it that way. You're picking who the next successful entrepreneurs could be. And I think about Elon Musk as maybe a counterpoint to that. I don't know if his investors, even though they were very mission driven, like I think Double Bottom Line investors were one of his first investors, what role can investors in a board play in helping shape entrepreneurs in the right direction?
Yeah, I don't think people would want him as a mentor. Let's go. We have audience questions. I'd like to invite, in this order, Dawn, Steve, Mike, Peter, and Morgan. Dawn, Steve, Mike, Peter, and Morgan, go to the microphone. I invite you to present your question for Matt. Thanks for that.
Hi, I'm Dawn. Thank you for your presentation. I'm curious, when you go to DC, what are the policymakers and elected officials interested in hearing, particularly about the waste technology? I'm very curious to kind of find out what the entry points are there.
It's been pretty remarkable, actually. So I've met with, at this point, probably dozens of members of Congress, 20-ish senators, people at the most senior levels in the administration. And it's been pretty unanimous that this is technology that they're really excited to see grow. And there are a lot of tools of government that can be used to help. Today, waste is primarily governed at the local level. This is like the primary job of mayors and city councils, is like picking up the trash and cleaning the streets. But actually, the federal government has a really large role to play in one, helping set the agenda, but also what are enablers. Could there be tax credits, like things that help kick off the solar and EV industry? Obviously, solar doesn't need it today, but 30 years ago, it really did need it. So there's all sorts of things like that the federal government could do to help.
Thank you. Steve.
Hi. Steve, we hear a lot of noise about advanced nuclear and things that are 10 years out in the energy area, but solar with storage is still the biggest. And do you see any new innovation in that area, new hardware that is near term, not introduced yet, but near term, that could move the needle significantly?
As I mentioned, I'm kind of an all of the above kind of guy when it comes to climate change. So yeah, I'm with you on that. Like solar and storage, easy, cheap, and fast. We could do that today. But thinking about base load power is something that we often talk about as an industry. Nuclear actually is really good for base load power, like large and consistent. The issue is these plants are big, and even the smaller ones still are going to take time and be expensive. But if we don't start now, we won't have them when we need them. And especially given kind of the rise of AI and the amount of energy demands we have there, it's okay to start making some longer term bets for energy. And I think some of the advanced nuclear plants are a great way of doing that.
Mike.
Thank you very much for your presentation. You said that you use philanthropy to advance carbon capture. What other forms of climate tech do you see being advanced or could be advanced with philanthropy?
So one of the things that we do differently with our philanthropy is, we do grants, which is what traditional philanthropy does, like grants for research or for policy. We also use the corpus of our foundation to invest. And most foundations use put their assets in stocks and bonds. We do that, but we actually use the corpus of our foundation to also invest in mission-aligned technologies. So, for example, some of the things that we've done over the years, a company called Antora, which is actually based in the Bay Area, they're building a thermal battery. Instead of like a chemical battery like lithium ion, they're using heat and storing heat in a really, really dense area and then releasing that energy when it's needed. I'm a big fan of being really creative with capital, as I mentioned earlier. And a lot of these technologies need that first bet. And for us, we think about philanthropy as the highest risk capital that's out there. If it goes to zero and we lose it, that was great. We made a great grant on a technology that was promising. But if that technology scales, then we also made a really great impact in the world. So we use our philanthropy as an investment tool as well as a grant tool.
Very fresh. Peter.
Yeah, hi. Thanks. Great talk. I moved to the Bay Area in 1989 and thought about going to work for Apple. I just graduated from college, but instead I went into the composting world, and I've kind of been in the zero waste area since then. I think one of the biggest challenges, maybe not in the Bay Area, but in other parts of the country, most of the country, landfilling is very cheap. So how do you kind of deal with that when you're trying to sell a device that maybe not everybody thinks they need because it's so cheap to do the opposite?
It's funny. My career is full circle. I started at Apple, now working on composting. For me, yes, landfilling is cheap in many parts of the country, but the value of the wasted food is very high. As I mentioned, we throw out $400 billion a year in food. The revenue of the waste industry is about half of that. So the value of the food that's being wasted is more than the revenue of the waste industry. So the incentive actually is to get at that. And can we prevent the wasted food? Can we build technology to identify that wasted food and prevent it? And then think about more efficient logistics and then recycling thereafter. But actually, ultimately, the best thing to do is prevent the food from being wasted altogether.
Morgan.
Hi. I'm curious, you seem like one of the few people that have figured this out or is actually aware of it, but what would you advise other investors and philanthropists like you who use, blended or both structures? How do you make sure that your philanthropic investments, so to speak, aren't just cleaning up the work of what kind of your for-profit or market-based solutions are doing?
It's interesting. I don't really think of it that way. Market failures are market failures, and yes, political winds change and trends change. But when I think about philanthropic dollars, they are really the highest risk stuff out there. And if it goes to zero, if it doesn't pan out, that was okay. And if my philanthropic dollar contributes to somebody else making money and that then company scaling and being profitable, that's okay too. That's actually probably the best outcome. Ultimately, technologies for climate, for health, will be successful if they can get to scale. And again, I've used solar and storage and EVs as an example several times because those are now at scale and profitable. But they were not for a really long time. And they needed government help, they needed philanthropic help to get there. And I've chosen to use my philanthropic dollars on things outside of those three primarily to help get them there.
Yeah, EV investors and solar investors there was quite a decades of volatility before we got to where we are.
That's right. And if we take the long view, another 10 or 20 year view, eventually all cars are going to be electric.
Right.
Again, things come in waves. There are trends. I've seen enough waves and trends and ups and downs in my career already. This wave is inevitable.
Thank you, Matt Rogers, for your leadership and for all you're doing. I'd like to give a shout out to the Climate One and Commonwealth Club teams for making this happen, including Jenny, our new ED, Brad, Megan, Rachel, Adam, Mark, and Dan. If you don't listen to the podcast, please subscribe. We do have a QR code where you can subscribe now. You'll never miss an engaging conversation, and you'll hear Matt coming up soon. And now please join us in the lobby for a conversation. Please introduce yourself to someone new. Talk about what they do with their waste, all sorts of great conversation openers, and there's some prompts on the tables if you'd like some other conversation starters. And thanks for coming. We'll see you here next time. Thank you, Matt.